What's up, guys? Thank you for tuning in to another AntTech Airsoft Studios video. Today, we're going to go over the installation of the Gen 2 improved feed block for the Featherweight M249. You're going to need a Phillips screwdriver, some Allen keys, and a punch and little mallet. The first thing you're going to want to do here is remove the outer barrel. So we're going to hit that latch, pull this assembly out, and we want to be very careful not to lose this pin that is holding this latch in. Now we want to take the grip off. In this gun's case, it's already HPA'd, so there's a few less steps involved here. But if your Featherweight is brand new in stock, you're going to have to take the base plate off. You're going to want to get the motor out and be really careful with the wires that are in there. Once the grip is off, you take your little punch and you take your hammer and you want to get this body pin out. Then the whole gearbox will pull right out. Again, this one was already HPA'd. Now we're here. This is where you're going to be changing out your feed block. This is a 2.5 millimeter Allen key. We're going to want to remove these 3 screws, and we want to keep these screws. The old feed block comes out, and now we have room for a new one. Let's take a moment to see what comes in the package for the Gen 2 feed block. So the main unit as it comes in the packaging is going to be the feed block with the detachable BB shield, the hop-up extension tube. This is if you're running a traditional A&K hop-up. And we're going to have the 5 millimeter feed plate pre-installed. We're going to have 6 90D O-rings to use as spacers for the hop-up and barrel assembly. And we also have this spacer to just act as another spacer for the hop-up and barrel assembly. This is here so you don't have to use like a dozen or 2 dozen of these O-rings. And then we also have the 6 millimeter feed plate. And wrapped around the tube on this feed plate, we have 2 70D O-rings for the same purpose of acting as a spacer for the hop-up and barrel assembly. Similar to the Gen 1 feed block, you are going to have to tap the threads with the original hardware. However, the Gen 2, it's much easier to do this on because of the improved geometry on these holes. You're just going to want to use a back and forth motion and just slowly work the threads in, like so. Don't worry about torquing this down all the way. You are going to have a wall wedged in between the feed block and the screw, and that's actually going to be the mag well of the Featherweight's receiver. You should be able to see the threads that you just tapped in there. At this point, it's important to determine what kind of mag system you're going to be running on your Featherweight. The purpose of this detachable BB shield is, on one hand, for print quality, but on another hand, it's so that you can easily detach this end off so that you have a little channel to route wires from the mag well into the receiver. So if your intent is to run this Bull Gear kit box mag, for instance, if you'd like to either power the whole gun from a battery inside the box mag, or power the box mag and the gun from a battery inside the gun, then that means you're going to need some room for this cable to route from the mag well into your receiver. If you don't plan on running a mag that's going to involve wires from the mag well into the receiver, I'd suggest leaving this end of the BB shield on. That way you can just have the guarantee that no BBs are going to make their way from the mag well into the receiver. The reason why I bring this up is because if you decide later on that you want to route wires from the mag well to the receiver, you are going to have to remove the feed block again in order to get to this BB shield to break that part off. Conversely, if you remove this now and then have no intent on running a box mag with wires in it, you're not really going to be able to glue this back on. In this particular gun's case, we are definitely going to be routing wires, so we're going to break this off, and I'm going to show you how easy that is. You could break it off by hand, and if you want, you can clean off the end with a little bit of sandpaper, and I'm going to do that right now. Once you're done with that, you can slide this back onto your feed block, and now we can install it into the receiver. And once you get these 3 holes lined up, what I like to do is I start with the middle screw, and I don't torque it down all the way. In fact, I don't torque any of the screws down all the way until I have all 3 of them in there. So now that I have all the screws in, I'm going to go ahead and torque them down. I'm going to start with the middle one, and I'm just going to hand tighten it. I'm not going to crank it down with all my might. I don't want to risk breaking the feed block, and I also don't want to risk stripping my Allen key or the screws. Once you torqued it down, just wiggle it a little bit and ensure that it's actually secured to these 3 mounting points. From here, you probably want to do a quick mag check. You want to take the mags that you might want to run in the gun, fit them in the mag well, make sure that you can click them in all the way, but also make sure that they don't have so much play that when they are pulled down, they disengage with the 5mm feed plate. Let's say you want a very cursed saw and you're going to run EPM ones. Let's click that in there and let's see how that fits. And now that it's clicked in, I see that there's a little bit of wobble, but that wobble is side to side. It's not up and down. So I know that the BB retention tab in this mag is engaged by the feed block. So in this mag's case, there's no need for me to switch to the 6mm extended feed plate. Here's a very old, discontinued Magpul PTS mag, and you can see when this is inserted in. Once I get it to click, there's a bit more wobble here, and you can kind of feel whether or not that BB retention tab is being engaged with or not. Now, before you go and switch your feed plate, what I'd like to do is put a couple BBs in the mag and then reinsert it into the feed block. And I want to see if all of the BBs spurt out, or I want to see if I can tilt the mag in such a way where it's no longer going to feed. So I'm going to cover the hole with my finger as I do this. And as you can see, I'm pulling the magazine backwards, and I release that hole with my finger, and there's no BB spurting out. Now I'm going to tilt the mag forward and show you that we're about to make a mess. So if I wanted to use this mag with this gun, I could keep that feed plate and put Velcro on the back, but that would make mag changes take a little bit longer. I don't like things to be that snug. Or I can change the feed plate to the longer 6mm one, and that'll just ensure that that feed tube is long enough to stay engaged with that BB retention tab, even if the mag tilts backwards a little bit. I'm going to do that same test again with that EPM1 mag, but now I'm tilting this mag all the way back, and yeah, I'm releasing my finger. I can already feel the BBs pushing out. Let's just send it. This is for you guys. Yeah. Wasn't as sporadic as when I pushed the other mag forward, but you kind of get the idea. If you do need to change the feed plate, you're going to need your 1.5mm Allen key, and my suggestion is actually to not remove the screw, but instead tighten the screw down so that it's only in the feed block and not the feed plate. And then the feed plate's removable, and then you would take your other feed plate, you'd pop it on, and then my suggestion is to push down on the feed plate as you loosen these screws again to get them back in these threaded holes. You just want to make sure that as you're manipulating the screw, the feed plate is not separating from the rest of the feed block. Changing the feed plate can be done without removing the feed block. That's one of the biggest improvements on the Gen 2 over the Gen 1, which was all one piece. The next step is to get your outer barrel and inner barrel situated using the O-rings and the spacers provided. The Featherweight M249 comes with the spring, and that's used to make sure that the hop-up is pressed up against your gearbox, ensuring a good seal, and also ensuring that the hole of the hop-up lines up with the hole on the feed block. But the problem with using the spring is that the spring can still compress. And sometimes if a BB gets kind of caught in the middle of this junction between the feed block and the hop-up, and that nozzle comes forward with enough force, it can actually force the hop-up chamber away from the gearbox, and it's just going to cause misfeeding and some flub shots that are super low FPS and have no range. So the idea of using O-rings and a spacer is there because you can fill that space. You can ensure that the hop-up is pressed against the gearbox. However, those O-rings and that spacer is not going to compress like the spring. So the way I like to do this is I start with one of the 70D O-rings because it's softer. I'm going to put that on first. And then I'm going to take the hop-up spacer and I'm going to put that over that 70D O-ring. And now I'm going to take the 90D O-rings and I'm going to stack them up as much as I need to ensure that this hop-up unit and barrel cannot shift back and forth when inside the gun. I was able to get the outer barrel to click in. However, this is wobbling back and forth a bit. That's not good. So we know that we need to at least add one more O-ring, maybe. So now I'm just going to add one of those 90D O-rings. Now that this is reassembled, we do not have any back and forth play. That's really good. I'm pushing this hop-up chamber and it is not moving away from the feed block any significant amount. However, my personal preference is that I want just a little bit more squish when I put that outer barrel onto the receiver. So I already know that using two 90D O-rings is not going to work. However, if I finish off with the 70D O-ring, now what we have is a sandwich where the bread of this spacer sandwich are two 70D O-rings. Now, the reason why I use different hardness O-rings is because by having a soft one up front and a soft one in the back, it allows there to just be a little bit of squish, because you can compress those softer O-rings a little bit and they will want to expand, and that'll just provide greater force pushing the hop-up towards the hop-up chamber. You obviously don't want to overdo it. And the reason why this kit doesn't just come with a dozen 70D O-rings is because if you stack too many of the softer O-rings, they will start to roll over each other and overlap, and they won't be correctly acting as spacers at that point. So now, this is the little bit of squish I'm talking about. I pressed the outer barrel in as far as I can. However, if I look at the notch on top of the outer barrel, I notice that I can just barely take my hand, push that in, and I can grab that latch and I can just manually pull it out and lock it into that outer barrel. So by doing that, I can tell that the little bit of force I was able to apply to this hop-up before to push it away, it's not making this hop-up move at all. This hop-up is exactly where it is. It is pressed up firmly against the feed block, and thus it'll be pressed up firmly against the front of the gearbox shell. I know this hop-up is exactly where I need it to be. So depending on what specifically you're running, that might dictate how many O-rings or spacers you may need to use. The very last part here that's worth discussing is the compatibility between different types of M249 hop-ups and outer barrels. In the Gen 1 installation video, I made a flow chart, and I feel like it just confused a lot of people because I got a lot of confused questions. So I'm just going to break it down as simply as I can now. When you first get a brand new Featherweight and you have the stock feed block, that stock feed block is only compatible with a Featherweight spec hop-up and the Featherweight spec outer barrel. But now with the AntTech Featherweight feed block, it is still compatible with the Featherweight spec hop-up chamber, provided that you have the Featherweight spec outer barrel to prevent this hop-up from rotating. And it'll work with the A&K or Classic Army spec M249 hop-ups, provided that you use the hop-up extension tube that's included in your Featherweight feed block kit. When using the traditional A&K or Classic Army spec hop-up chamber, you can absolutely use an A&K or Classic Army spec outer barrel. If you wanted to run the A&K or Classic Army spec hop-up inside of the Featherweight outer barrel, you can do that, but you'll need to modify the hop-up chamber or the outer barrel. As you can see, this is not going into this hole. So what I've done in the past is I've attached a Bull Gear M249 hop-up on my drill press, and I spun it, and I actually brought the outer diameter down using files, Dremels, and sandpaper so that I got a nice, smooth, cylindrical surface that slid into the original Featherweight outer barrel. Now that Bull Gear makes a Featherweight spec hop-up chamber, there's really no need to go through such extent to get this to fit. If you want to run the A&K or Classic Army spec hop-up chamber, I just suggest that you use an A&K or Classic Army spec outer barrel.
And there you have it. You just successfully installed your Gen 2 feed block in your Featherweight M249. Now you can sleep at night knowing that you have reliable feeding, expanded compatibility, and you can route wires a lot more easily from your magwell into your receiver. I mean, these are the things that help me sleep at night. I don't know about you guys. But what will help you sleep at night is knowing that this Gen 2 feed block is 100% covered by us. If it arrives defective, or if it broke during installation, or if you took a tumble, or whatever, we got it covered. You can send an email over to Anthony@AntTechAirsoft.com, show us your proof of purchase, whether if that's from us or some other store, and send a photo and a description of what's wrong with it. And we will make sure that at the end of the day, you have a functioning Gen 2 feed block at no extra expense to you. Because after all, you already purchased the product, you should have the working product. And this coverage will be going on for as long as we are making and selling this Gen 2 feed block. Don't forget to like this video, comment your questions or suggestions, and subscribe to this YouTube channel, and hit that bell notification so you know every time we upload a video. Otherwise, that's all I got for you guys right now. So good night, God bless, and I'm out.